Previously on agentpalmer.com, no matter which football you choose, Captains and Quarterbacks offers emotional journeys for viewers. The mystery of the codex is always on the periphery, and have you become your own favorite since last episode as David is? This is the Palmer Files, episode 104, featuring Matt Gilhooly, host of the Life Shift podcast, an instructor for higher education, and someone who is also working towards bringing conversation back. We discuss education and expected life paths, perfection, being creative, long-form content in all forms, the act of listening, celebrating things, moving on to what's next, and so much more. Are you ready? Let's do the show! Hello and welcome to the Palmer Files. I'm your host, Jason Stershuk, also known as Agent Palmer, and on this 104th episode is the host of the Life Shift podcast, Matt Gilhooly. Perhaps you have heard the Life Shift podcast, or you were one of his students as he is an online instructor in higher education, or maybe, like me, you connected with him online, or perhaps you don't know him at all. This episode should fix that. You will either come to know him, or you will come to know him better. He's here because I thought it would be interesting to speak with him, and the conversation you are about to hear has proven me correct. We discuss education and expectations, our different approaches to learning, perfection, proving worth, starting a podcast, challenging creative outlets, how communication has changed, the art of listening, practical instruction, what's next, and celebrations. All of that, plus a whole lot more, is coming your way. But first, remember that if you want to discuss this episode as you listen or afterwards, you can find all contact information for Matt and myself in the show notes. You can find more information about Matt's work in the show notes as well, where there are links to his personal website, mattgilhooly.com, that's mattgilhooly.com, and his podcast, the Life Shift podcast, found pretty much anywhere you can find or listen to this podcast. Don't forget, you can see all of my writings and rantings on agentpalmer.com, and of course, email can be sent to thepalmerfiles@gmail.com. So without further ado, let's get into it. Matt, I see that you, like myself, were a communications major in college, but unlike me, you went back for more education, and I wanted to know, because I was someone who, when I got that bachelor's, I was never coming back. Like, I was done, and I want to know, like, what was the decision making? Like, did you always want more?
No. Okay. I never wanted one to begin with.
Oh, okay.
But I think, well, I have two masters. I actually got my first master's when I was like 23. And that was just because I talked to a lot of people about this, but I feel like growing up in the late 90s, it was very much, there was like some kind of societal checklist that I had to follow, in which, like, you had to do well in high school, then you had to go to college, then you had to pick a degree that was super easy for you because you had to do well in it so they could get a good job and get promoted and all these things. So it was like, I did my bachelor's degree. The college saw that I did well, and they were like, hey, do you want a free MBA? And I was 22. And I was like, well, a free MBA, of course I want a free master's degree. Plus, I don't have to go into the real world and work, right? Yeah. And so you're going to pay me to go to school, get a master's degree, which society told me if I have an MBA that I'm going to be like rich and famous, right? It didn't happen. But
well, I mean, you and I are in similar I didn't get the master's thing. Like, that wasn't on my bucket or checklist, but like
wasn't on mine either.
Doing well in
mm-hmm.
well. How do I say this? Doing well enough in high school. I was a very never lived up to my potential in high school kind of a guy. So like, I wasn't going to like fall on my face when I got to college, but getting in was going to be an issue because I didn't live up to whatever it was. But there was never a hesitation. Like, that's what college is, what comes next. Like, that was always the thing. And then when I finished, I just went, now what? Like it was just a thing. And then, retail for 7 years. And then you kind of finally get your foothold in the professional world. And then that all fell apart for me right before COVID. So I've kind of been like freelancing for the last few years. And it's freeing and terrifying all at the same time. But like my favorite thing, and I guess this will lead into your second master's degree, is when COVID happened and I was already out of work, everybody was like, you should go back to school.
Yeah.
And I like to consider myself educated because like I like to read books, I like to learn things, but I don't necessarily think I require the structure of going back to school for a degree. And that's kind of one of the reasons that like, even though I had all this time and master's degrees were very cheap during the pandemic because everybody they were hurting too. I just it was never a real consideration. So I guess my question to you is how do you end up getting a second one? Yeah. Like why go back?
For many of those reasons. Well, I mean, when the pandemic happened, I got kind of bored because the job I work in higher ed and I just teach online. So it's super easy in a sense that, we have 12 semesters a year. And so every 4 weeks I'm doing the same thing.
Okay.
And what was happening is I would finish my workday early, which in a normal world, when it's not a lockdown, that's great because you can do other things, but there really wasn't anything else to do. So in tandem with being just like having a lot of extra time, because my job didn't require so much, I guess, brain power, I would say, for a while.
After you do it for so long, and if you're recycling it every 4 weeks, I mean,
yeah. And there's only so many ways that a student can do something incorrectly or correctly, and so I felt like my brain was just like not doing anything anymore. So I decided that I was like, well, maybe I'll just like forcefully activate my brain again.
Okay.
And like you said, a master's degree, I found an online degree at the University of Florida, and it was fairly inexpensive for, what we would consider, I guess, expensive. I don't know. It was expensive, but it wasn't like so crazy.
Yeah.
And I was like, not like you though. You say you read and you feel like you educate yourself. I feel like I needed to be forced.
Okay.
I felt like I needed some kind of structure that forced me to those particular deadlines or to just get better at certain things that maybe I was okay at before. When I got my MBA, it was very focused on business. It was probably less writing, less research, those kind of things. And so getting this communications PR focused degree online forced me to write a lot. So I became a better writer. I became a better researcher. And somehow I got back into that same 18-year-old mentality of I have to be like perfect again, like that late 90s mindset of like I have to prove things. And this stems back to my childhood. And I don't know if we'll go into that, but, I had early childhood trauma and my mom died when I was a kid. I'll just say it. And from that moment, I felt that I had to prove to everyone that I was going to be okay.
Okay.
And what that meant to me was to be perfect and to not make mistakes. And so that kind of permeated through my education as well. And so even at 40, I guess I went back at 40? Nope, 39. Okay. And going back, I still fell into that same routine of just like trying to do it. But having come from experience of like working in higher ed, it was a different experience because I could see behind the curtain a little bit and I could read between the lines, which was a little disheartening in some ways as well. But, it filled my time. I felt like my brain was activated again. I ended up starting my podcast during that time period. I published a bunch of kids' books and coloring books. And so I really filled that time during COVID. It was like no sitting around.
So the question that begs for me is I have a thing written somewhere in my house from a note that's just like perfect is the enemy of good. Mainly because like I will be the guy who's like maybe a third edit on this blog post is fine. It's like, no. Like you can publish that. It's fine. Yeah. Like it's okay. Have you gotten to a point, because you said you were trying to aim for perfect, like, and obviously you've been doing the podcast for a while and nobody's 100% perfect out of the gate. Like, have you kind of, like come back from like, okay, it doesn't have to be perfect. Like good's good. Like good's okay. I can publish good.
Yes. I think the podcast is different because it's kind of this creative space, right? You can make whatever decisions you want because you own it. It's yours. Okay. What's perfect to you, might not be great to other people. But I will say, one time on the podcast, I got a 3-star review, and it was like, it's just okay. And it really like stung, right? Everyone's like, oh, you made it. When someone says your show sucks, you've made it.
Yeah.
But me, I like really internalized it. I mean, my show is super personal, but then I created merchandise around it. And so it made me feel better. Like I kind of like took ownership of it. But during school, I was very much like, if I'm like at a 98, it's like, oh my God, what am I going to do? But I ended up with a 4.0. So, perfect.
Right.
What is perfect?
I end up having to recite that to my friends. Like I've got other.
Yeah, it can be debilitating.
I think it's very important to state this now. You are 100% correct in that art is not like perfect, is very different, but I'm surrounded by artists who are friends that have come to rely on me, to be honest. Like, yeah, and it's one of those weird places to be where like, I'm a fan of my friend's work, but I'm also willing to be like, I'm going to challenge you on this. Yeah. Like a little sandpaper is not going to be bad for this. It's going to smooth a few things over, or, it's not just because I enjoy hanging out and having a cup of coffee with you. Like I'm playing devil's advocate because you should be able to defend this decision. And I would love to take credit for that, but it really goes back to a poetry teacher I had in college who would challenge you on everything. And at the time, 17, 18-year-old me, whatever it was, is like, this is trivial. Why are you making me defend this
rhyme?
Like what's the point, right? And eventually I became that professor to other people in a way, and I think it's made everything better. And what's weird is now I demand that kind of feedback from my friends. It's like, no, I don't want you to shit on it.
Right.
But I don't want you to tell me it's great. Like there's always gotta be room.
Right. Don't blow smoke.
Yeah. There's gotta be room to grow all the time.
Mm-hmm. Well, and I think there always is. I mean, truthfully, on that same note, I love finding typos in things that have been professionally printed, or like it's a favorite pastime of mine. And you're like, how many people looked at this? And we're like, okay, but it's still like, it shows that we're all human, and like there are flaws, and we're not going to be perfect. There's really no such thing as being perfect. But I know growing up, I was very conditioned to feel like I had to be, but that was simply related to my experience.
I can easily relate. I also love the misspelling in a book that's been out for like 2 decades.
Oh, so good.
When my favorite, as good as those are, the juiciest ones have been like, I've had the blog for over a decade now, and I've gotten to know some authors, and I've gotten some advanced copies. And the juiciest one is finding one that missed everybody else when you get an advanced copy of a book, and being able to email an author before the final printing so they can be like, oh yeah, that's totally not right. I will fix that. And it's like, that's amazing. Because it's like, not only did I spot it, but I was able to help somebody correct it. It's like, oh, this is cool.
Right. But as long as they're willing to accept it, right? I actually did that today. I booked something for a vacation, like a place to stay, and their confirmation email had like an extra word in the sentence. And so like, I was like, thank you. P.S. Just the teacher and me just wants to point out you have an extra word in that sentence. Hope you don't mind. Like I don't even know this person, but I also felt compelled, like maybe other people are judging them on that. Maybe I can help out. Yeah, but it also shows me that we're just people.
Well, we are. I think the other thing is do people really read every, like I read a lot. I feel like I would read a lot more if I learned how to skim, but I'm not, I'm not capable of consuming media that way. I need to read all the words that the author wrote. Right. So I think that there's a thing where like some people, especially in communication, I was in tourism marketing for a very long time, and having been out of it for so long now, one of the things, and it's not, I wanted to be in marketing. I didn't want to be in tourism necessarily. But one of the things that's scary to me is hanging around people that just consume half of what I'm saying and I'm their friend, much less the campaign we just paid X amount of money to put out. That's, we whittled down to 8 important words. Well, if my best friend's only going to hear to half of what I'm saying, what's an uncaptive audience going to get of my 8 words? Are they going to get 4 of them? And which 4? Like, and so I feel like communication has changed in a way that I'd like to think that your podcast is also long form ish. It's not here's 5 minutes and I'm going to condense it. I'd like to think this is a way to kind of turn back the page a bit, where like you want to listen to all of the words that the person is saying.
Yeah, I think the pandemic changed people a little bit in that way. I feel like people are listening a little bit more. I'm with you though, with the podcast, one thing that I would say, like one skill that I've had to develop, and I feel proud that I think I have, is the skill of like actually listening, like you say. I think for so long, especially before I worked in higher ed, or even when I worked in higher ed, in our meetings, you think of this corporate mentality where we're all sitting there waiting for the next silence for us to bring up our, look at me point, or ask that question that's going to blow people's minds. Meanwhile, we're not listening to what's actually happening. We're just kind of waiting for that silence to show off, because everything was so very performative. I felt that, that was what we were conditioned to do in the 90s and early 2000s. But I think the pandemic, what happened is we all were like we all had to stop and go, okay, what's really important? Because we're all going through this together. Do I want to emerge from this doing the same exact things that I was doing before? And so I kind of feel like there is a shift in what you're describing of people just like actually communicating versus performing for each other. I think there's a little bit more of that, at least from what I see and what I'm able to do on my podcast.
Yeah, I mean, the last time I was in the corporate world, I didn't do very well because I listened. Like, and I think it's one of those things where, if you're my best friend, if you're my partner, my girlfriend, my boyfriend, my wife, my husband, my sister, my brother, I want you to listen to me.
Yeah.
But if you're my coworker, I don't really want you to listen to me. And I used to get in trouble for that, because what would happen is somebody would have an idea and I would ask them a question they didn't think of. Now, the only way you can actually ask a question they didn't think of is to listen to to not be waiting for when can I say my idea. You're telling me that if we do this, X will happen. And I will just say, okay, I hear what you're saying. What if it doesn't? That's not that nobody's expecting the ball to be lobbed back. And I think a lot of the time people are taken aback and almost take offense by it. I wasn't trying necessarily to be a dick, which is how I came off. But at the same time, I listened to what you said and I saw a fault with it. And I'm not just going to let you, like, hey, you don't have pants on. Maybe don't leave the house. Like and I'm not good with subtlety, and maybe it's just my demeanor. And it's like, hey, I don't know if that's going to work. What about this? Like but I think there is a growing nature to communication in general, where like you have to be willing for people to hear you.
Yeah, and not in a performative sense, right? And not just like, did you hear how great I did? Did you hear, like you have to be all parts and not just the great parts, right? Because I think the more interesting parts of humans or of us are the messy parts, are the broken parts, are the ones that aren't perfect.
Yeah.
And the less interesting things are I got a promotion, or this happened, like I sold this many books, or what you see a lot of times on social media, in which, like, I made $8 million yesterday. Here are the 8 ways that I did it. And you're like, I don't know. I just don't gravitate towards that kind of stuff. But what you said was interesting to me. And maybe, I don't know if you see this from a podcasting perspective, although I listened to your conversation with your father and it blew my mind that he listens to all of your episodes. I didn't know if that was a joke or not, but.
Oh, no, he does. Because I'll get texts occasionally.
That's amazing, because what I see is that my show, I feel like more people that I don't know love listening to my show than the people close to me. And I don't know why. I mean, I have people close to me that like listening to it as well, but then some of them don't. And I don't know if they're like afraid that if they do listen and it sucks, they're going to have to tell me that it sucks. I don't know what it is, but it's very interesting that your dad listens to everything.
So there is, it's not just podcasting. In my experience, it's content creation as a whole, whether it be YouTube videos, podcasts, blog posts, what have you. Now, my father wants to be supportive, and he likes the show, which is why he kept listening. And I would never expect my father to just listen if he thought it sucked. Right. But at the same time, I think he's the rarity, right? I think most of the time, creators are surrounded by their fans first and not their friends and their family. Mm-hmm. And I look at, when I first broke into podcasting, it was around a group of podcasts that all had a similar listener base. Mm-hmm. But of those people, wives didn't listen, sons, daughters, parents didn't listen, siblings didn't listen. We listened. Like, we became our own little family, but nobody else did. And I think in that regard, like, my father's the outlier. I think if there are people close to you that listen personally, that's the rarity.
Yeah.
Most of the time, it's the strangers who develop into friends potentially because you're communicating on either social media or email or on the show, right? Like, that's a whole different thing. But most of the time, they aren't a part of that thing unless they're creating it with you. That's kind of like the one asterisk. Like, if you're creating it with somebody, but I think that's par for the course in everything. I just kind of expect that some of my friends are going to listen.
That's interesting, because you just recently said about, like, in your corporate setting where the people around you that were not close to you were weirded out that you were listening. But I almost think that, like, the strangers will read or listen more, and the people around you will cut out the filter or have like a filter of some sort, and they'll listen to the components that they need to, unless it is hey, I need you to XYZ kind of moment. Because I really feel like I pay attention maybe in more detail to people other than the people close to me, because I think we speak a different language, if that makes sense.
Yeah. I also think it depends on this is going to sound weird, the mode of communication, right? Mm-hmm. Like, I have always and forever and probably will always be a phone person.
What's that?
I use my phone for,
like, you talk on it?
I talk on it. Like, that's I know, like, my last non-smartphone was the Motorola Razor, right? And on that, I would talk to people a lot. And I probably, at that point, for the people around me, I was talking more than texting, I was the oddball. And then I upgraded to a smartphone, and I always hated the fact that, because the first smartphone I ever had was an Apple. And I hated the fact that the one thing that drained the battery life more than anything else was to actually use it as a phone. And it wasn't until down the road where I got I went to Android, and now they're a little bit better, that I still like, if you look at my usage on my phone. Maybe second to maybe listening to music or podcasts, it's the phone app, like the actual phone app. And that's just who I am. So I think it's just, I'm used to listening. And I think the other piece to this is I'm obviously not doing it alone.
Right.
And so I'm forcing my friends, my family to talk to me. Some of them are close by within, 15 minutes. Some of them are within 6 or 7 hours, but I'm forcing them to have a conversation because they picked up the phone and we're going to talk.
Yeah. You're creating more synchronous communication, whereas I think the world is a little bit more asynchronous, which is, it's a good thing for you, what you're doing. But I would say that's, definitely in the rare side.
Yeah. And I'd like to say that like it was also, the technology was all supposed to make us come together, right? Like I was supposed to be able to just text you the address of the coffee place and then we were going to meet up. And that just ended up devolving into, I'm just going to text you, I got a raise, instead of going to the coffee shop to share that news with you in person. And that's not the middleman. Like, legit, like that's the part that I kind of always worry about, is like the text to get your friend to meet up with you is not the middleman. That's like the hors d'oeuvre to like actually a genuine experience with another human. And we've cut that out. And now it's like, I got a raise. Cool. Thumbs up emoji, like, okay, like smiley face, like it's just so weird that we've kind of taken the humanity out of communication.
Which is so weird because, or it's just thinking about that is so weird because I'm that person, but also I thrive on the conversations that I have on my podcast. So it's like I have this, like, outside of that, I don't mind the asynchronous aspect of communication. Plus, I know the people that I do communicate with regularly are quite busy in whatever they're doing. And so I don't want to be that burden. But then I really cherish the time that I spend with guests or with people being a guest, and having the time where there are no distractions happening around me. There are no text messages going off. There's no dings, like anything that would distract me. So it's very weird that I have both sides of those.
Well, what's funny is I'm not remotely that far away from where you are, as far as like everybody seems to be way busier than I am. Mm. But I will tell you, they need that too. Like, oh yeah, I don't
really want it. Like, I don't want to talk on the phone.
Well, but you know what? Even if it's just like inviting one of my busiest friends, who's one of my best friends, who works way too much, and forcing him to come over for dinner. Yeah. Like, I know.
I'd rather do that than talk on the phone.
But occasionally he thanks me because he knows he needs it. But occasionally, these are friends that just are used to me calling, so they'll pick up the phone if they have the time. And a half hour later, I feel like not only have we communicated and we've had, we've shared stories or like, hey, this is what's going on in the world or in my world or whatever, but also I've taken a half hour of his day that is now no longer focused on work because he works too much, or, other friends where it's similar situations. And it's a lot of work on my behalf, but I also get something out of it because I feel like I've saved them. Like I've given their brain a break from work, from whatever's going on, and we can yell at each other about the state of whatever, because that's what we do. And so I kind of look at it as I'm throwing them a line as well. Like, you can escape for 15 minutes. We can just talk, and sometimes it's a 20-minute conversation instead of dinner, because that's all they've got, but I'm willing to take it.
Yeah. I think it's important for cultivating relationships and maintaining relationships. But also I think, just thinking of the pandemic, a lot of people shrunk that list of their relationships, right? They've really realized, like, which ones do I want to spend more time on? And so maybe they're pouring more energy into a smaller cup of relationships instead of being like, oh, I have these 500 acquaintances that I'm regularly keeping up with. Now it's a lot more focused. I do think people are doing it more. I think people see the value in relationships way more than they did before the pandemic. I feel that working is a lot lower on the list. You know, still people work a lot, but I don't see as many people making that the priority. I think that's shifted a little bit. I don't know if you see that.
Yeah, it's weird because it's not like I've been not actively looking for real employment. I don't actually enjoy freelance that much because it's always like, well, where's my next paycheck coming from?
Right.
And I want that stability. But at the same time, my biggest problem is I can't lie to get the job. And I know some old acquaintances and old coworkers who could easily sell you anything and you would hire them. And before you realized that they weren't what they said, they'd be on to their next job. Like I can't do that. I don't have that in me. But at the same time, a lot of the times in interviews, I get one question specifically, which is, how do you make a successful X? Now, X could be a podcast, a video series, or a newsletter. And I'm pretty sure that the powers that be always hate my answer. And I think it's because it's the truth, and they probably know it's the truth, but they don't want to hear it. So here it is. How do you make a successful podcast? You hire somebody to make the podcast, and you make it 80% of their job, and you keep it 80% of their job. The reason your last podcast failed is because the guy who was already overworked was the one who you put in charge of creating it. And then when it didn't do as well as you thought it should, you moved it down his priority list, or he moved it down his priority list. You want your email newsletter to do well? You need somebody who's going to write it and then follow up and do the A/B testing and all the other things. But you have to let him do that and not be like, oh, by the way, can you also start a podcast for us? And can you also cover this event and cover that event and go stand up? You cannot do that. Success doesn't work. You can't run a marathon if you're holding 15 backpacks. You might get there in a few days instead of a few hours, but how do you want to cross the finish line? And all of these questions are prefaced by, how do I make a successful X? Well, that's how you do it. You don't just double down on like, you're really good at writing our intro podcast scripts. Can you also write these other 15 things? Maybe, but only if it's 20%. Like there's definitely a limit. And I don't think they want to hear that because that's not their existing, like all the people I know that are in marketing and development, they have a lot of ideas that they'll never be able to do because they're all guaranteed failures because none of them have the initiative to add more to their plate.
Well, and I think too, the things that you would be going for, like the things you mentioned, I think a lot of people don't understand. I think they think on the surface that these things are easy to do. They don't have a lot of legwork to do besides like, take podcasting, for instance. We just get on here and we record and then we just put it on Spotify. You know, like there's a lot more than that. Yeah. There's a lot more than that. And I know we're not going to talk about podcasting, but I think people don't understand that in some cases, a single episode could be someone's like 10 hours of someone's work. You know, or more if it's scripted, if it's a story based, if it's not just a conversation, you know, but rather we're taking clips and stuff. That's, like you say, a full-time job. And I think people that don't do it, whether that's podcasting, whether that's email marketing, whatever that is, people that aren't doing it, it looks on the surface like, oh, that can be easy. Like a social media manager. Oh, you just post on social. There's strategy behind it. You know, there's a lot of content creation. There's a lot of other things that come along with it. And so I think you're right. I mean, I think your answer is accurate. I don't know what they want you to say.
I think they want me to say like, well, whatever you want, you know, like, you know, like, cause
But good on you for not bending to that.
Because I'm in a position where if they hired me to do the thing, knowing that they're also going to give me 15 other jobs, I can't actually guarantee anything.
Right. Well, you can't really guarantee in a lot of those anyway.
Yeah, that's true. But like but I know that that's how it works, and it's like, okay, I get it. And nonprofits are tough, and that's kind of where I like to be, because I think that mission-driven work is a lot. I don't know. It's easier to get behind. It's easier to get into.
Oh yeah.
But at the same time, you're limited on resources. Time ends up being the one that you can give more of than money. So but I get that. And all of those people are passionate, and most of them, I don't know. I haven't really met anybody in the nonprofit sector who's like, I don't really like what I'm doing. Like,
they're not there for that.
Yeah.
They're not there for the money.
No, they're not. And
because there isn't any.
It's true. I want to ask, before we get too far away from it, like, are you still a professor?
Yeah, I still teach. I don't necessarily call myself a professor, but I am an online instructor. Yeah.
And is that like, what did you actually go to the first degree? Was that going to be for something you could teach in?
No, I got my MBA. I ended up working for multiple like small startup-ish companies where I was doing lots of things like on the operations side, on the project management side, nothing official, not like a official type. In your example, this was definitely that like wear every single hat kind of thing, which I enjoyed because it was a startup kind of feel vibe. It was not something where I was hired for this one thing.
Well, you also end up with a different 9 to 5 every day of the week. Yeah,
essentially. And so I did that for a while. And then I moved back up north to Boston from Florida to be around family. And then I realized I didn't want to live up there anymore. So I moved back. And then I just kind of fell into it. And I've been doing it pretty much since 2008. And at all different levels. At one point I was managing, the first semester for all undergraduate students and working on curriculum and not teaching. And now I'm just teaching, which makes my life a lot easier. It gives me time for the podcast. It gives me time to get a second master's degree. It gives me time for all these extra things, which is nice. But no, I didn't go to school for this. But again, the school that I work for is, it is a private for-profit college. But the way we structure the curriculum is more trying to be like, sure, this textbook says this, but in the real world, like this is actually what you're going to be doing. Like you're taking an accounting class, but you're never going to be an accountant. So as someone that's working in this industry, here are the things you need to know about accounting. Okay. Like these practical things, so you don't get taken for whatever. And so I think having that real world experience working in startups and working in smaller businesses allowed me to teach a lot of different classes in the business programs. So right now I teach like a portfolio and a personal branding type class. And I also sometimes teach a leadership class. So it's really like, it's all stuff that I've either done like in the workplace or that I went to school for.
I got to tell you, I love the idea of a practical education. Like, cause I'm 40 and I have these conversations with my friends where I feel like I'm giving them a practical education sometimes, where it's like, oh, I've been through this. This was nothing that ever came up in any of our curriculums ever. Here's what you need to know. And it's so vastly weird that there's these entire swaths of skills and knowledge that if I didn't have like a family member who went through it or a friend who went through it, I would literally be just up creek. Like I would have no idea where to turn or what to do. And I consider myself a fairly educated person. So I feel bad for the people that don't consider themselves that, right? Like they're at such a greater loss. I'm willing to read a book about it. I'm willing to read a 15,000 word article or, tutorial about it. There's a lot of people that aren't.
Yeah.
And how do we help them?
I don't know. I think, on the other side, I think we glamorize college too much. I don't think that everyone should go to college. I don't think everyone's equipped to go to college. I think it's okay that everyone doesn't go to college. I think that we need to, like you're kind of pointing out, is like vocational trade skills. A lot of those are even more lucrative than what you can get with a college degree.
Yeah,
and so I think we glamorize the idea of getting a college degree.
I think that's the generation behind us is in that boat. I think it's you and me. I think we were one of the last generations, truthfully, that this elder millennial, whatever you want to call us, we were the last generation to get sold that Gen X bill of you go to college, you get a job.
Yeah.
It fizzled out right around our time of getting out of high school and going to college, because that's, again, like you said at the very beginning, it's what you did.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. It was my checklist. It was the next thing on my list.
Yeah. And
the same thing for you.
Yeah. I think it's,
I mean, they even do it in school. You have to take the pre-SATs and you have to take the SATs. Like, you do it in school.
Yeah.
And then everyone's checking each other, like, who got what score? All right. And now you're automatically, like, in Florida, I don't remember applying to college. I feel like all the state schools were like, here, you're in, like I signed this little Post-it and you'll be applying. So I don't even think like it was something that I had to work towards. Had I had to write like an essay, or I don't think I wouldn't want to do that. I think I just like automatically got, I don't know. I can't remember that far back, but I feel like I didn't do much work to get into college.
Yeah. And when you were there,
I didn't do much work to stay in college.
I was going to say, like, my freshman year,
I did very well though.
Atrocious. Like I eventually I did well. And I think that's kind of,
I wasn't allowed to not do well though.
Okay.
In my own brain. I don't think anyone else told me that.
All right. Well, fair. I think I had to learn to fail badly. Like I had my first semester was like, oh, this isn't like high school. I don't have to go. I just do the work and skate on by. And then it was like, you are on academic probation. It's like, oh, you know what? Maybe I need to find another way.
Yeah, you were talking to your dad about something about your fear of success, but also like a little bit of fear of failure. And my whole life was definitely the fear of failure. And, it's something that I probably still fight. And a lot of it is, like when you're a child and a parent dies, in your brain as a kid, so for me, when my mom died, I felt that she abandoned me, like, because your brain is not so formed, right? You don't understand that. And the reason why I was afraid to fail is that I thought if I did something wrong or I didn't do great, that my dad would also abandon me. And then I would be alone. And so that just develops. It just goes along with you. And if you don't deal with it, because it was the 90s, people don't talk about trauma, people don't talk about grief, people don't talk about that stuff. It just followed me through my life. And it just, it kind of snowballs on the way up as you're going through everything. And so even as an 18-year-old, 20-year-old, it was like, I would still call my dad and be like, look, I got an A, and he didn't. I mean, he cared, but he didn't care, right? Like nothing was going to happen if I got a B.
Yeah.
Nothing was going to happen if I got a C.
But you only know that
so
now.
Afraid.
You only know that now.
I only know that now.
Yeah. So I guess it's
a mess.
I mean, you heard the conversation with my father, but like, has this
he didn't
knowledge
care either, right?
No, but has this knowledge changed your relationship with your father? Like, you don't have to call him and be like, I had a great episode.
I still feel like there's still a part of me that still likes to get that validation.
I mean,
in some
I think
capacity.
We all do as children.
I don't feel that I don't have a worry of abandonment anymore. I mean, as a 42-year-old, I don't, I'm okay. But I do still think there's something in me that feels the need to share something that is deemed successful with my father. No one else in my family, really, just him.
Okay. Yeah. I'm trying to think, like, first of all, I have such a hard time acknowledging success. that I don't even know who I would call. And it's just one of those things where like I have one of my best friends, Chris, he has probably about a 15-minute commute, and we talk on his commute. That's our daily thing in the morning. I don't have a commute, but if I did, it would overlap, and we just talk. We just talk about stuff, and he's like, I don't know. I said something to him about like, oh yeah, the podcast is turning 4. Because obviously every few years, it's every other. So, 26 is my 1 year.
Right.
So 104 is going to be my 4 year. And he goes,
it's a long time.
You should celebrate that. And I'm like, nah, it's not like, it's not my brain is on to the 105 and 106 and 107 and 108 and 109 and 110. And what do I do, down the road?
It's your checklist. It's just the next thing on the list.
Yeah. I don't have that like stop. And look, we did an entire episode. 52 is Chris and I talking about this entire thing of like me being like, it's been a year. And he's like, yeah, you should celebrate. I'm like, I just kind of want to go on to the next one, but You said I should celebrate it. So here you are. And I think I don't know if it's healthy or not, but like it's where I'm at right now. So I'm
I think I think it's the conditioning of our time period. I think is 100%, because I had the same thing when I was in the final semester for this most recent graduate degree. I wasn't going to walk. I wasn't going to go to I didn't go to graduation for my MBA because I had just graduated like 10 months before that with my undergrad. So it was just like, it was a quick thing. And I was like, why am I going? Who cares? I just did it.
Yeah.
And so this time I wasn't going to go again because I was just thinking in your same case, it's just like, okay, well, it's just another check mark. It's just, I finished it. I'll carry on to the next thing. And I said it out loud, like on social media, maybe on LinkedIn. I was just like, should I go? Like, and people are like, yes, you should go. And so you just spent 2 years doing all this work. You've been producing all this stuff. You've done really well. You've challenged yourself when other people haven't been doing as much stuff. And so it was like, I forced myself to go. And of course I was just like, well, whatever. Like when I was there, I was like, well, did I really need to go here? Because of that whole mentality. But I think it's like you say, it's like this generation that we're a part of, where we're, in the graduating in the late 90s, early 2000s, I guess. It's just that like feeling like we just go on to what's next. You don't stop and look back. You just keep going. So I get it. I try to do better though. I try to celebrate those wins, or what I feel like, oh, wow. Okay. If I look at it long enough, it's a win.
This is where I rely on my circle. Like I'm fairly vocal about like, oh, I'm at episode 100 or
that's great.
Blog post, whatever. And I rely on them to be like, you should really celebrate this. Like, okay, all right. Well, I guess I'm going to listen to you. Like,
make yourself a cake.
Yeah. And so I need that help. And look, they're all in the same boat. Some of us have the checklist on a never-ending loop a lot more than other people. And that's...
I mean, how many Post-its do you have on your desk right now?
Well, I did just clean, but okay. I have at least 4 separate to-do lists.
Yep, exactly. My point. I have a bunch of them all stuck all over the place. And there's a satisfaction that I get. I don't know if you get this, when you cross something off. And sometimes... Yep. I will do something first and then I'll put it back on my list so that I can cross it off, because there's this sense of like, I think we know that we want to acknowledge that we've achieved something. There's something there where it's just like, I want to be able to say that I did it.
Yeah.
But it's weird to celebrate it. I will say though, like with podcasting at first, when I did it, or like when I first launched, I didn't want to celebrate much because I just didn't realize all the intricacies. But now when I hear someone like you, I've done 100 episodes, 4 years into it. That's a big deal. Like that's something to celebrate. Now I know, because, I think I just released episode like 70 of my show, and I have, 96 scheduled. And so it's like, that's a lot of work. And so I've learned now, because seeing people that have done it longer, to go, okay, good for you. Like it's a lot easier to celebrate someone else, but then also bring that reflection back on me. So I'm thankful for that.
The more interesting parts of us humans are the messy parts, the imperfections. And I think that we've taken the humanity out of communication by keeping all of or most of our communication short, impersonal, and less physical, meaning in person. A conversation can be a break from what you're focusing on. And so in all of these things, we learned that maybe getting a cup of coffee is the thing you need to do. Maybe sitting down for a long conversation is fine. Or perhaps just a phone call. Because the thing about it is, and this is what I always bring across, and I think Matt agrees with me, is that talking to someone, not texting with them, not emailing back and forth, not sending some kind of direct message via any platform, allows you to connect with that person. And perhaps, maybe just even on the phone, there's a physicality to that doesn't exist anywhere else. So, my question to you is, when was the last time you sat down for a conversation? Your own. Like, I appreciate that you listen to this podcast, and this is a conversation that I believe is worth listening. But when was the last time you had one? And why has it been that long? And if not, why aren't you doing it more often? Thanks for listening to the Palmer Files, episode 104. And now for the official business. The Palmer Files releases every 2 weeks on Tuesdays. If you're still listening, I encourage you to join the discussion. You can find all related ways to contact myself and my guest, Matt Gilhooly, in the show notes. There, you can find links to visit his personal website, mattgilhooly.com. Again, that's mattgilhooly.com. And his podcast, the Life Shift Podcast, also found pretty much anywhere you can find or listen to this podcast. The music for this episode was provided by Henno Heiter. Email can be sent to this show at thepalmerfiles@gmail.com. And remember, your home for all things Agent Palmer is agentpalmer.com. All right, Matt, do you have one final question for me?
I do, and it's going to be in the theme of my podcast. So my podcast is the Life Shift Podcast. And so I'd love to know if you've ever sat down and kind of reflected on your life on a very specific moment that's really changed the trajectory of your life, like a very pivotal piece of your life that really just changed things, whether that's good, bad, or indifferent.
Yes. And I've talked about it. And I've done an entire episode about it.
Damn it.
And so, however, I don't reflect on it. And I don't know if that's important or not, but this is the thing. So I, due to circumstance, I can't remember what episode it was, but I did a solo episode all about this, which this was my college capstone project. And then I re-recorded it and re-released it for this podcast. And basically I spent a semester abroad in Israel. And then I came back. That was the second half of my junior year. And then I came back and I got an early admit into college. And so that, but the circumstances leading up to that was all that I wrote a paper. Now I was in a rural, very rural school district. And so the English teachers didn't review the papers that we wrote. They had quote unquote theme readers. And basically one of the theme reader who read one of mine was like, oh, by the way, your entire belief system's wrong. And, now, There were grammatical errors with the issue. Are we really polished writers as juniors in high school? Probably not. However, I went to the teacher and I was like, hey, I have a problem with some of the ink on this. And they're like, we're not changing your grade. I was like, I don't care. I don't care if you change my grade or not. I want to talk about the comments. And so, I very much tried to handle it myself. And when I felt like I was going nowhere, I got my parents involved. And because it was spiritual, they got the rabbi involved. And long story short, 3 months later, I'm on a plane. And the rest is kind of history. And I've told that part of the story.
Yeah.
But if I don't take offense, if I don't stand up and go, I don't like what you're writing here. As what was I, 15 maybe?
16, yeah.
That changes everything. Because if I keep my mouth shut,
right.
I don't get my parents involved. They don't get the rabbi involved. It's not a spiritual thing. I don't go overseas. I don't get an early admit into college. I probably go to college high school for the whole 4 years instead of just 2.5. And that's the one. That's the one that changed everything. Now,
was that the first time you had stood up to like a quote unquote authority figure in that way?
No, that's the thing. I've done it before because I am, I'm not afraid to tell truth to power, which might make me one of the more unhireable qualified people in the world. Because right now, and I can spot it when I walk in for an interview or a networking thing. I can tell the people that want to hear what they want to hear. I'm just not the person.
And you're not going to play into that.
Yeah, I'm not going to play into that because I don't want you to think that's what you're going to get. I'm a straight shooter. That's just how it is. And so, no, I was a troublemaker. I mean, I think.
Well, I think there's a difference between troublemaking and.
Well. Okay, at the time,
standing up for yourself.
I guess at the time it would have been troublemaking because that was standing up for myself. But talking to power and standing up to there were times when, especially in a rural school district where I know some of those teachers knew school board members and weren't necessarily qualified for the things that, I knew I understood some of the reading material more than they did. And I would have no problem asking them questions that I knew they had no way to answer. I'm just like, I
just
know
to get them.
There's a time in everyone's life when ego matters. When I was in high school, if I was smarter than the teacher, I wasn't going to hold back. And
on purpose?
Yeah, I was just going to go. And here's the thing. There were at least 2 English teachers through middle and high school that were my match. They were wonderful. But then you sit in a class of somebody who is not your match and you go, all right, well, I guess I'm either going to be bored or I'm just going to
play the game.
It was, I don't.
But that one was more personal, right? If you're getting this feedback from someone on the outside. That one was more personal,
but I think that it's kind of like a happenstance thing because I think had it been one of the teachers that was my match that I could talk to, I don't think it would have I don't think the response would have just been, I won't change your grade. Because I think they would have heard me say, I don't care about the grade, it's the comments, right? So I think some of it is that that personality where it's like, all right, I think I guess I'm in a fight now. And that's kind of the way it was. Because I didn't throw the
fight was more instigated by the teacher saying, just dismissing you so than the words on the page.
I think that's what escalated it for me to go get my parents.
Right. Because so then you got your parents, which you feel involving someone other than yourself was what started the upward trajectory towards your trip and coming back.
Probably because it's you're 15, and if you're not going to get the attention of the teacher, then who else is?
So in this case, were your parents always supportive of you bucking the system? If we're going to use some kind of phrasing.
I would say that neither of them would argue against me being a bit smarter than some of those teachers.
Right. But were they always behind you in your decisions in those ways?
I've never, they were behind me in that one.
Okay. But other ones?
it's probably the only one that's really come up
Okay.
in that regard. I like to think that knowing both of my parents fairly well, it will not be an unequivocal yes. I think there were definitely times when they were like, what the hell are you doing? But I think when push came to shove, most of the time, if it wasn't all ego, then yeah, I think they were behind me.
The only reason I ask that is because, sometimes it's just seeing that's the, if you were like every time before they were just so very dismissive of it. And then you were like, this one time they stood up behind me. I could see also how that, like understanding that now I have support, like, oh, I can do other things. And then you kind of lead into like, if there's possibilities out there.
If I'm honest, I would be willing to bet that there were probably other things before that, like little things that I could have easily brought my parents in. But I was strong enough or had enough ego to be like, I could fix this.
So the teacher just saying no was just like, and they were very dismissive,
like not dismissive. Like there's I want to say it's I want to say it's in my mother's episode 50, that she tells the story of like, after I was comfortably overseas, they went and met with the teacher and the president, and really? The teacher still didn't get it. And my mother, not my father, which I would have put money on, my mother was the one who almost jumped over the desk because she was so angry that she didn't get it. No, it's not. It had nothing to do with me at that point.
Just it was like frustration.
It was just a frustration of like, you still do not, like, we're not talking about grades anymore.
Right.
How do you not understand that?
Yeah.
And so, yeah.
But you said you also got your rabbi involved?
Yeah, because it was a lot. It was based on it was an essay about religion. And at the time,
to poke the bear.
Yeah, seriously. I mean, at the time, I was not. I mean, I'm still Jewish, but I'm not like the most religious.
You're culturally Jewish.
I'm culturally Jewish. I'm also spiritually Jewish, but I'm not practicing.
Okay.
So and I think at that time I was wavering and I was reading lots of other things. Mm-hmm. But I think I had a good relationship with that rabbi because I'm a year and a half, maybe 2 years removed from my bar mitzvah. So it's not like I didn't have a relationship with him from studying through that. So I think that it was just an outside force because of the subject matter. Like, had it been about baseball, like we probably it's just my parents and the president and the principal and me, right?
Well, you wouldn't have got the feedback.
Yeah. So
someone felt attacked by reading your differing views on
and what's funny
belief.
Is I've been kind of cleaning out my house. It's the one thing I have been doing over the past 5 or 6 years, like going through, like, I don't need this. I found not only that essay, but I found another essay that was also, that may have even more incendiary comments written on it, but that was dated after it. So it was like all that crap had already happened. And when I got the next one, it's like, nah, just ignore this now. Like at that point, it's like, I've got thicker skin, but the first one was kind of a shock. It's like,
and you don't know who did that feedback, right?
No, they protected it's anonymous. It's a theme reader. That's
even worse.
I mean, I could tell you that they were a pack-a-day smoker at least, because when we got our essays back, they reeked of nicotine. But outside of that, who knows?
It's so interesting, though. I mean, I really love when people. I mean, it sounds like you already knew, but I love when people have to like think back, like, what was that one thing? And it's just so interesting that you've already done that and realized how that pushed you farther. Do you think that you'd be a different person if
100%? Because I don't end up going to the college I go to.
Okay.
Because I that college was, at the end of my dad's episode, he asked me what I thought about my 3 options when I returned from Israel, because they were go back to the high school, go to a different high school, or get an early admit into college. And it's that early admit into college that kind of I meet a lot of my friend Jason Zapata, who's been on the show a few times. He's the one person I talked to from high school, and he wasn't even in my class, right? So he basically, when I left halfway through his senior year, that was it for him too. And so everybody else I know that's close to me in my life is from college, and I meet them because I'm at that college at the right time. So even just socially,
Yeah.
That's the point. Like, it's that early. It's all those circumstances that lead me out of high school and into college early. There are probably other moments since then.
Oh yeah.
But that's probably the one big, like, those are the two paths that diverged.
Yeah. Your sliding doors moment. If you've ever seen that movie.
But at the same time, I don't think about it that much. Like, even still, I think when I redid the senior project, because it had copyright music from the senior project, the actual senior, but like, I took that moment to kind of look back on it, but I still think there's a part of me that takes it a little bit for granted, and I don't nearly focus on it enough. But at the same time, kind of like, what's next? Like, I'm on to the next. Like, it's that
doesn't matter.
Those roads,
in your mind. Yeah.
Those roads diverged so long ago. At this point, that's more than half my life ago.
Yeah, you can also tie it to the not. I mean, I don't know if you've ever celebrated that moment, but there are a lot of celebrations to be had in that moment of you standing up, you defending that, and advocating for yourself by getting other people involved. There's a lot to celebrate there that I think a lot of people wouldn't do. A lot of people wouldn't have done that.
That's fair, but I'm also not
You're
one
like,
to
so
celebrate my own stuff anyway.
I know.
So like,
I know, that's what I'm saying. It's attached to this. I don't celebrate anyway.
Yeah.
So that it makes sense why you wouldn't reflect on it.
Yeah.
But I think
I've tried, and like recently I've tried to get into like, not journaling because I'm not, but
I
just
can't do
like,
it either.
but just like sit down and write for the sake of writing. It lasted a few weeks.
You could just podcast.
Well, it ended up being like, oh, here's a paragraph for my next intro, and oh, here's two paragraphs for my next blog post, which is fine. But all the stuff I actually wrote, like that would have been more journaling, was all depressing, and I was like, I don't want to. I could probably be better off just listening to a podcast and not writing this like, maybe it's good to get it out, but at the same time, I wasn't thinking about it before. So let's just move it along.
I mean, I think there's just a good learning lesson in sharing that story. So I'm glad you've recorded it, because I think what I find is when you hear other people's stories, you might not have experienced the same thing. You might not be going through the same journey that the other person is going through. But I always feel like there's some element of someone's life story that you can resonate with, or like that you can be inspired by. And so someone listening to like, oh, wow, the fact that as a kid, you like put your foot down and were like, no, this matters. This is not just a grade. Like, who cares about the grade at this point? You're insulting me essentially by what I'm saying. And if you're not going to listen, then I'm going to get other people to help me listen. Like, there's some inspiration in that for other people that are maybe in those crossroads, you know? So I'm really glad to hear that you shared that story.
And I also think it's important to note that, you know, you're approaching 100. I'm over 100. For the most part, I've got like an 89% new person, new guest mentality. I've had a few repeats, but like, you learn in these conversations, especially if they go over 15 minutes, everybody's got those pivotal moments. And whether they are from last week or 20 years ago, we all have them, and they're all potentially inspiring to someone else, whether it's me on the other side or you on the other side or whoever's listening.
I also feel there's value in sharing it. Like, I don't know about you, the first time I had to like piece together the beginning, middle, and end of my own journey, I learned a lot about myself. I shared it in a way that had never been told in that length of space. And so I see it with my guests as well. Like, oh, wow, there's a lightness to it, or there's something that they've learned about themselves by sharing it. So I don't know. I love storytelling in that sense of like real stories that matter.
I think there's also, the few times I've done it, because there's I did Agent Palmer Behind the Microphone episode where I basically told from the start of the blog to the start of the podcast and everything that happened in between. And you're right. In telling that story, I reflected. Mm-hmm. But had I not sat down to tell that story, I do not reflect. In fact, I'm probably still sitting here without reflection at that point. for better or worse, need to put it on the checklist.
Yeah. Well, think about it too. When you have a conversation, usually when you have a conversation with someone, they ask you about a specific thing, you answer it, you kind of go back on that. Someone going through the same experience as you, they only hear this back and forth. They've experienced it with you. So an example of this, when I told my story about like my dad sat me down when I was 8 and was like, your mom died. And then I had to move to another state, live with him full time. But we had the same journey, right? Like we lived the same lives together.
Yeah.
But when I told my story on my podcast, he wasn't there. So he didn't get to interrupt. He didn't get to say, no, that's not how it happened. I sent him the episode and he was able to hear what that experience was like from me from beginning to end. And it was we ended up having a conversation that we didn't record, but we had a conversation that was really valuable because it was like, oh, I just didn't even realize you were experiencing it in that way. So that's what I mean by like, normally you don't have the opportunity for someone to hear your story that lived it with you from beginning to end. So, I bet that episode when your parents listened to it was quite different as well.
Yeah, probably. Yeah.
Yeah. Conversations like this, long form, super important.
100%.